Dun, 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 dun. Dun, dun, dun. Hey, everybody, welcome to TPIM SR Live. I'm your host, True Power is Mine. Thank you all for joining me today. Hope you're ready to learn. The past is this present. We got here, most of us, many of us, in spite of the obstacles and hurdles that was facing our people and ourselves. I hope you enjoyed last night's programming. I just got out of meditation. I'm ready to go. But before I do this, I want to start this by getting in the groove. Why must we live this way?
This is a Master Lee Mochow production.
But unity for all humanity. That means you, my friend. Shh. Why must we live this way? Why must we live this way? Will somebody come and please educate me? It's not plain to see why we're giving up our liberty and our freedom just so we can be accepted by this world that really cursed us behind our backs. Well, listen to the facts. You, friend, it won't play win.
What's up, Brother Dave?
This planet, why must we live this way? Oh, listen to me. How can we be so blind to see that we cannot destroy our planet? Before we destroy ourselves, we are tied to it like it is tied to us, baby. Without us, this world will be dust. And without this world, we will all be dust. Listen up. Just my friend, that is the atrium of the world that we live in. Oh, listen up again, you see, and we'll win, and we'll fight this again. Spiritually and physically, we must. Oh, listen up, I don't want to be turned to dust. I don't want to end up in a camp. What's up? I don't want to be
Brother Calvin, Brother Fred,
with the latest bacterium. My friend, or viruses again. I don't care about the plan. You know it's wicked as can be. And you will ultimately see, and you will ultimately believe if you survive the terror. Ronay, yes, my friend, listen up again. PU is on the forefront, moving it. Yes, my friend, the PC to eliminate freedom, baby, from the face of the earth. It's fast at work when you see the boom, yes, the nuclear blast. Now you'll see our rights crumble to the past. Oh yes, my friend, listen up again. It's up to you and me to stop us in. You see, unity can break it free. The deadlock on our rights and freedom, baby. Whether you're a socialist, whether you're a communist, maybe even a capitalist, you all still have a stake in this, like you see. Oh yes, unity is about sharing and caring, baby. If we don't take it back, it will be taken from us. It's a fact that men and women are working on just that. They are evil as can be. They burn effigies of people. Oh, listen up, baby. They got groves around the world. They're like a bunch of owls. They sit there at the night and they hoot and they howl. They will evil things, put some wicked things in your brain, make you act like you're insane when you are totally sane. Yes, you know the mental strain. If you have some problems, I mean, come on, people, it's time to unite. Why we choose to live like this is really beyond me.
Actually have had this
now,
kind of contact with other beings.
I want to
It's an interesting concept.
hold on one second here. I think we're gonna go with this one. I was received this information from a confidential informant, as I normally am. I find it quite fascinating how much true information is truly out there, y'all. But yet it almost seems like consciously we choose to live like idiots. We choose to live outside the know. We choose to remain unaware of these things. Now you can think that by some way of some magical cupcake is going to drop out of the sky and feed us all. But I'm telling you, that's a lie. That's the food that cowards feed on. And that's the type of nonsense that keep us from progressing or evolving into the sentient form that we deserve to be dwelling in and experiencing. Until you're willing to give up everything, you will gain nothing. Let's start this.
And very serious political and military events of the next 20, 30 years. So, Maury Island affair, there's a UFO sighting shortly after Kenneth Arnold gave us the famous flying saucer story. And a man that we know as Fred Krisman claimed that he had been involved in that incident. He claimed that people had been hurt, that he had pieces of the UFO. And what happened was individuals of the United States Army Air Force at the time visited Krisman and his partner, Mr. Dahl, and retrieved pieces of this so-called debris of the UFO. They got on a plane, the plane crashed, and both of these Air Force officers died. These are probably the first two victims, mortalities associated with the UFO phenomenon. The first two, there were many more since then, as any student of UFO history knows. So Fred Krisman is this strange guy, you know, a strange background. No one knows too much about him. He seems to have been some kind of confidence man, some kind of criminal, a crook, but maybe also an intelligence agent. There is evidence that there were intelligence connections to his background. He was also somebody I like to call a wandering bishop, and I'll get to that story in a minute, because this is a striking aspect of this whole field that people have not covered because they don't understand it. Fred Krisman, 1947, seminal event in UFO history. He shows up again 20 years later, being investigated by a district attorney, Jim Garrison, in New Orleans, because of his alleged role in the Kennedy assassination. We'll come back to that in a minute. One of the people investigating the Maury Island affair and all of the UFO incidents that were taking place in the Pacific Northwest in 1947, in the months before and after the famous Roswell crash, was this man, FBI Special Agent in Charge, stationed in Butte, Montana. He was in charge of a bunch of files we call the SM-X files. According to the FBI's own documentation, UFO matters were classified as SM-X.
SM-X, Scully, Moeller, X-Files. You see, folks, a lot of this stuff is nothing new. It's been going on for quite the while. But until we understand that the reason why this is all being perpetrated is to ensure our compliance, whether it's subconsciously or consciously, is to ensure that we feel overwhelmed and we will not fight back. That's the reason why they're putting in your head, oh, the secret deep state, ew. Oh, the Nazis that just won't ever fucking die. Oh, the fucking UFOs. All this Chicken Little shit is to get you to be powerless. The sky is falling. The sky is falling. Sister CJ, peace and power. Welcome to the show. I'm glad you made it. But I'm here to tell you, I'm here to be that lone voice in the darkness. You are powerful, my friend. You are powerful. If you would only unite, consolidate your power, focus it, home it in, and grant yourself liberation. Oh, it's a beautiful day. Let's continue.
Security Matter -X. These were the original X files. This man's name is Guy Bannister. Guy Bannister is a man who will come up again in our discussion 20 years later as a suspect in the Kennedy assassination. If you saw the movie JFK by Oliver Stone, this was Guy Bannister, the actor playing Guy Bannister. Now we come to another man called Jack Martin. Jack Martin's real name is Edward Suggs. He worked as an investigator for Guy Bannister. He was another bishop. We'll get to that story in a bit. He's probably the same guy as the name that comes up in the files of the Office of Special Investigations of the military as Agent Jack S. Martin, who was investigating UFO incidents in California in 1949. In the movie JFK by Oliver Stone, Jack Lemmon plays Jack Martin. I'm showing you these photographs from the film so you get a kind of context. If you've seen the film, you know that we're talking about real people, real individuals, and their real influence. Of course, Oliver Stone does not go into the UFO aspect of this case. These photographs have never been seen before in public. You're the first people in the entire world that is actually seeing these photographs because they're photographs that were given to me personally by a man who was involved with Jack Martin. Jack Martin, the Jack Lemmon character in JFK, the man involved, they say, in the Kennedy conspiracy in New Orleans, was also, in addition to being an investigator, in addition to being possibly a man investigating UFO incidents in California, in addition to being heavily involved in the group around Lee Harvey Oswald in New Orleans in 1963, was also a bishop in a church, in a weird church, in a church that no one had ever heard of before, in a church that even Jim Garrison didn't understand. In his own documentation, in his own writings, going back to the House Select Subcommittee on Assassinations when the United States government was going through an investigation of the assassinations in the 1970s, Jim Garrison wrote a note, copies of which I have, saying, look into this church stuff because I don't understand it. Well, there's Jack Martin, dressed as a priest in the 1970s after the Kennedy assassination. His friend and associate was David Ferry. David Ferry and Jack Martin both worked for Guy Bannister. David Ferry, former Eastern Airlines pilot, rabid anti-communist, very much involved in anti-communist activities. He's another bishop of the same church as Jack Martin. And of course, he knew Lee Harvey Oswald, as we know, in the Civil Air Patrol. In the movie, that was David Ferry, unforgettable guy in a fake wig and fake eyebrows, talking about enigmas wrapped in mysteries, wrapped in puzzles, wrapped in all kinds of things. So this is the David Ferry character that made famous in the film. And this is an actual photograph of David Ferry dressed again as a priest, as Jack Martin was. We had co-conspirators in the Kennedy assassination, as we will see, ties back to the UFO and the space program, who were involved in a strange church, a church that didn't really exist except on paper. And this is the church, the American Orthodox Catholic Church. If you review the FBI files, all of the investigations that were undertaken for the Warren Commission, and later by the House Subcommittee in 19...
Also, it's imperative for y'all to understand. Hold on, let me pull this out. It's imperative for y'all to understand that what he's talking about is organized, basically, Nazism, infiltrating the church, infiltrating the government, seizing power. Okay, I'm gonna put this here so that y'all can see. You have to understand, people, that this game, this system has been here for a hot damn minute. And there ain't no more, oh, maybe they'll come around, maybe they'll change, without economic viability, without saying collectively and unitedly, the decent folks. Now, if you're not decent, you ain't going to be down with what I'm saying, so you might as well just go to someone else's channel right now. But if you're a decent human being, and if you want longevity, if you want sustainable society, then you better listen up and take some damn notes. I believe I can feel the good in humanity. It's just that we have no proper mouthpiece. We have no charismatic leader that can take all the different angles and bring them together on the level, focus it for common cause and purpose. This is what we need. Let's continue.
The 1970s. This name will keep coming up, and no one does any background check on it. No one goes any further. Members of this church included a man called Profeta, we'll get to him in a second, David Ferry, Jack Martin, a man called Carl Stanley, who was mentioned in the FBI files, Tommy Jude Baumler, Thomas Beckham. These are all names familiar to researchers in the Kennedy assassination. They were all members of this church, most of whom were bishops in the church. The church had a lot of bishops, not many priests, and no congregations. Seriously, just bishops, no priests, no congregations. Rarely did they have a building. This photograph was taken in the only building I ever knew that housed the American Orthodox Catholic Church in the Bronx.
All right. Hear me, friends. Now, if you can make a church that is ultimately complicit in the assassination of a U.S. president, then we can certainly make a church that would be complicit in our collective liberation. Did you hear me? If you can make a church, or not you, brothers or sisters, but they can make a church that's complicit in the assassination of a U.S. president, then brothers and sisters, we can make a church, by God, that will be complicit in our liberation. Dare I say, let's continue.
Where I'm from. And I knew the church personally. I knew
Lamont, peace and power. Welcome to the show.
These individuals personally. I knew this guy right here. That's Profeta, the guy who created the church. I knew him. And I was a member briefly of this group because I lived practically next door. And it's a long story. I won't get into it now. I won't bore you with it. But the other names on this list are extremely important. Ferry Martin, we already know, involved in the Kennedy assassination conspiracy, at least according to Jim Garrison. Tommy Jude Baumler was a lawyer in New Orleans. And his claim to fame, as we found out only about a year ago, was that he was the man who incorporated another church, this one called the Process Church of the Final Resurrection, of the Final Judgment, rather, Process Church of the Final Judgment. This was the group that was implicated, rightly or wrongly, in the Charles Manson family, in possibly the Bobby Kennedy assassination. It goes on and on. There are all these churches that swim underneath the radar that have connections to intelligence agencies, the military, and as we will see, to the space program. This was Profeta. I knew this guy personally, a Ukrainian Orthodox priest who left the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to create this church of his own, the American Orthodox Catholic Church. He was picked by Thomas Dewey as the White House chaplain. There was an election between Harry Truman and Thomas Dewey. Everyone thought Dewey would win. Dewey was the Republican. Truman was the Democrat. Truman won by a narrow margin. And Profeta once showed me the letter.
Brother Wiley, welcome to the show. Peace and power.
That he got from Thomas Dewey, appointing him as White House chaplain when Dewey thought he had won the election. This is how politically prominent and important he was. On the board of directors of the American Orthodox Catholic Church was J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation of the FBI, the man who gave us the X-Files and Guy Bannister and all the rest. J. Edgar Hoover was a member and on the board of directors of this phony church. Another member was Christopher Maria Stanley. He's now known as Saint Christopher Stanley. He was canonized by the guy who took over when he died. Close associate of all these guys. Ferry Martin tried to implicate him in the Kennedy assassination. He tried to implicate them in the Kennedy assassination. When Profeta had created the American Orthodox Catholic Church, he summoned all the other bishops who had been bishops with him in this church to go to New York and present their bona fides, their bona fides, their credentials to him and to Hoover. The only one who obeyed this was Carl Stanley, Christopher Maria Stanley. Christopher Stanley goes to New York, he goes to Profeta, he signs on, he goes back to his home in Kentucky, he's dead less than a month later, and only 2 weeks after the death of David Ferry, the mysterious death of David Ferry, another bishop in the same church. Suddenly, the bishops of this church were all being killed. They were all dying under mysterious circumstances, all within a few weeks of each other.
Oh, that's just a coincidence, ain't it, Yao? Or is it tightening up the plan? Clipping the loose ends. Clip, clip. See, there's only a certain portions that's in the know. It's a circle within a circle. And within the inner circle, there's a dot. Now, everyone that's listening to the broadcast, except for maybe two, are not even in the outer circle. And I'm telling you right now, the inner circle, the dot, the actual dot, they are all pets of the aliens. They are all pets. They're traitors to humanity. They're traitors to mankind. Let's continue.
This story you have not heard before, because no one knows what to do with the material. No one knows what to do with this information. So when it comes to churches and guys in funny hats, you know, there is some degree of mystery out there and confusion. This is the organization as I, over the years, uncovered it, starting with our friend Profeta over there, to Christopher Stanley, to David Ferry, to Jack Martin. These were all guys implicated in the Kennedy assassination, and they all wore funny hats. The connection was this, another funny hat, that's J. Edgar Hoover in his Masonic Shriner fez, because he was a Freemason, as I think we all know. So there's J. Edgar Hoover, to Guy Bannister, the guy who investigated the UFOs in 1947, the guy who was writing up all these telexes and letters, headline SM-X file, UFO sighting here, UFO sighting there. Down here.
I hope you guys are understanding and seeing the correlations between intelligence organizations, religious organizations, and occult, for the layman's, satanic, Luciferian organizations, all working in concert to co-opt the United States Republic form of government to get us to the state of crisis. And guess what? When we finally hit the state of crisis, then they'll come in with the control. Cybernetics, all your iPhones, your Androids, the sex dolls, the AI, the Google searches, all of this is working in concert, my friends. What a glorious day to control you and your seed for at least the next 1,000 years. Keep on working for your own enslavement. Let's continue.
Here is Fred Prisman. He was the guy that Bannister was allegedly investigating. And next to Prisman, there's Profeta again. Profeta, who was on the same board of directors of a church as J. Edgar Hoover. All these people working in concert, all these people working together, a phony church, mysterious goings on, and really weird hats. So what does all this have to do with the space program? You're sitting there thinking, okay, this is all very strange, but what are we here for? Well, let's fall back a little bit. We'll start to see the threads come together. In the United States, the space race began on Halloween, 1936. And you're looking at this charming group of individuals down there.
Hold on, y'all. You know I had to stop it on that. Come on now. You know I had to stop it on that. Halloween, Old St. Hallows Day, is the start of the space race. One of the most premier satanic holidays, where many of child blood is shed on the altar of death and destruction. Oh, do you hear me, people? Do you hear me today? Everything in your life was predicated on death and destruction, and you're wondering why you're getting cancer. You're wondering why your children are coming out malformed. You're actually wondering why you have so much psychological turmoil in the form of depression and stress and anxiety. It's all by plan. It's all by plan. Let's continue.
relaxing in front of a rocket. These were America's first rocket scientists. People like Jack Parsons, Theodore von Karman, and this is the launch at Arroyo Seco in California on October 31st, 1936. The very first launching of a rocket by American space engineers. Jack Parsons has a crater on the moon named after him. Jack Parsons was a co-founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL, at Caltech in California. When you watch the space shuttle launches or you read anything about it, you'll always come across JPL all the time. He was a co-founder of JPL. Crater on the moon named after him. Solved a lot of issues regarding solid fuel storage of rocket material. And at the same time, he was a follower of Aleister Crowley, the Aleister Crowley, the infamous magician who...
Aleister Crowley. For those of you who are uninitiated, maybe first time listener, Aleister Crowley was deemed the most wickedest man in his time. Artists that are present now use his philosophy. They read his book. He talks about sex magic. That's why you always hear about the Hollywood types involved in the most weird, strange sexual behavior. You fools don't get it. They're not doing that for sexual gratification. They're doing it for demonic influence and favor. The victim of those sexual practices does what? Shuts themselves from God. Oh, God is not protecting me while I'm getting booty raped. Ooh. And they grow up to be basically non-believers. I mean, if you want to use such a basic term. They separate themselves from spirituality. They separate themselves from the source. Once you're separated from the source, then you are fair game for the predators. And that's what we're all in. We're in this game. Brother Satan, peace and power. MW, peace and power. Welcome to the show. You guys and gals have better get with it. Time is 9. There's 9 people running the show. Let's continue.
Who created his own cult, his own religion. Parsons himself, at the same time he's working on rockets for the U.S. military, he's also conducting rituals in the desert, trying to summon angels and demons. I'm not making this stuff up, in case you're wondering. One of his co-workers, one of his partners in his ritual working, his ritual magic, was L. Ron Hubbard, the man who later went on to found Scientology. Hubbard stole Jack Parsons' money, stole Jack Parsons' girlfriend, ran to Miami and bought a boat. In later years, Hubbard would speak very fondly of Aleister Crowley, claiming he had met him. He never did. Crowley died in 1947, before Hubbard had even actually heard of him. But Parsons was investigated by the FBI as a security risk because he was involved.
Did you hear what he just said? Aleister Crowley died in 1947. What happened in 1948? The nation of Israel was restored after 2,000 years, baby, of being gone. B. Williams, welcome to the show. Peace and power. Thank you for joining us. Let's continue.
Involved in occult workings. But at the same time, Parsons is a brilliant scientist. Well, just as he's getting ready to leave the United States through all the pressure of the FBI investigations, there's a mysterious explosion at his home. He dies under very mysterious circumstances. The house literally blows up with him in it. Theodore von Karman was the leader of the group that founded the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He has a crater on the moon named after him. Born in Hungary, studied in Germany. He was a brilliant rocket scientist as well. And he formed the Jet Propulsion Laboratory with a couple of other people, Frank Molina and, of course, Parsons, Ed Foreman, and a Chinese scientist, another brilliant man called Qian Sui-sun. Qian Sui-sun goes on to later fame in another area of rocket science and space science. So von Karman was a guy shown here, by the way, with a Nazi scientist down here. This is Qian up here, and this is von Karman. This scientist von Karman had known before in Germany and was instrumental in getting him to come to the United States to work on the space program with him.
Hold up, stop the press. Sister Barbara's in the house. Peace and power to you, sister. Thank you for waking up and coming up in here. And Tyrone, peace and power. Welcome to the show. Humanity, we are growing stronger every day. Let's continue.
Tien was the man they sent to debrief Werner von Braun. Werner von Braun, of course, was the Nazi scientist that was brought to the United States under something called Paperclip.
It's called Operation Paperclip, buddy. Sister Janice, peace and power. Yes, welcome to the show. The force is strong with us today. Let's continue.
Werner von Braun we'll get into in more detail just in a few minutes. But Tien was also investigated by the FBI. Everybody involved in the rocket program in the United States in the 1930s and 1940s wound up being investigated by the FBI for one reason or another. He eventually got so sick and tired, he defected to China after all of the harassment he had been undergoing by the FBI. And what happened? He develops China's space program. He creates the Silkworm missile that was used to such effect during the first Iraq invasion. When Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and all of that, he was sending Scud missiles and all of this. The Silkworms were in use there in the Middle East. So
now does it make sense, MW? Great comment. America wouldn't have a space program without Nazis and Chinese. And let's go one step far, alien/demonic knowledge. P. Jones, peace and power. Welcome to the show. Brothers and sisters, our unity is our victory. Our unity is our victory. Together we can infiltrate and convert and subvert the power mechanism that is controlling us all. We can do this for future generations. Humanity will sing songs of this generation's aspirations. Let's continue.
Tien, starting as a patriotic American citizen helping with the space program, through all the suppression by FBI, all the harassment, gives up, basically, goes back to China, and becomes a hero in China, jumpstarts the Chinese space program. When we're talking today about the space race and the space programs, as we'll be getting into with the other speakers, keep in mind the fact that it began in two important places. It began in Germany with the rocket systems and the rocket development in Germany at Peenemünde and Nordhausen, which we'll get into in a second. But it also started in the United States. And the reason that China is launching rockets today and launching satellites is because of this man, who could have been part of our space program for the rest of his life, and instead, because of all sorts of political nonsense, wound up.
Oh, stop it. See, this is where the dude starts lying because of white supremacy. The man that started the Chinese space program, you know good and well while he was over here in the United States, hey, gook, you dink, you little zipper head. You know that's what they were saying in the damn lunchroom. I smell fish. And they start looking at old boy over there. He got tired of that shit. He's like, you know what? Fuck this shit. I'll go back to my people and we'll do a couple things. And guess what? 40 years later, we're where we're at now today. Way to go, SW or WS. Way to go. Incompetence always destroys the oppressor. Let's continue.
Going to China and giving them a space program almost complete. At the same time in Germany, in the same year, almost the same month, 1936, we have Fritz Goslau of the Argus Company. He begins work on remote-controlled aircraft.
Uh-oh, there's the drones. There's the beginning of drones, remote-control aircraft. Yes, Brother Shannon, I posted a link to this in the chat room. I'm here to serve. I'm here to bring you guys information so you can research it yourself. You know, I always say, don't bother researching, just listen to TPIM SR Live. I already viewed this. I already researched it. And I'm bringing it and presenting it to you, the people, as a service. to hopefully get you to spark the reality that we need to come together. We need to work together. The decent people of humanity needs to found a righteous government to ensure the rights of every individual. That's why I do what I do. I want to see young men and women become economically viable. And no matter what economic system we're participating in, all needs to have a fair shot at it. Because life is just a matter nowadays of dollars and cents. If it don't have dollars, it don't make sense. And it's not sustainable. Let's continue, brothers and sisters.
Correct. And a few years later, December of 1942, we had the first launch, successful launch of the V1. If you've been following History Channel stuff about World War II and the Blitz and all of that, you'll know about the V1s and the devastating effect that they had. This is a picture of the V1 at the time, and this is another one. Later termed the world's first cruise missile. These were launched from aircraft. Dropped the V1 would drop from a plane and then go on its way. Aimed at London, of course, and later, as we know, at Antwerp. Devastating weapon, resulting in almost 23,000 civilian deaths at the time. At the same time, back in 1941, we have the first jet-assisted takeoff launch in California by the von Karman Group. Jack Parsons is here. We have Jack Parsons right here watching the takeoff of the first jet-assisted takeoff plane, a jet-powered plane. So here we have the rocket scientist who's also an occultist and the follower of Aleister Crowley and a member of all kinds of other occult organizations involved in these important events of the rocket program. In 1944, of course, we have the V2. The Germans launched the V2. Actually, more people were killed making the V2 than were killed by the V2. Because of slave labor in Germany and because of the concentration camp labor that was brought to Nordhausen and later to Mittelbau-Dora concentration camps and the factories attached to Buchenwald, more people were actually killed making these V2s than were actually killed in suffering under them.
I'm sorry, y'all. The spirits moved me to say this. How many brothers and sisters in the United States of America, due to incarceration, has been forced to participate in these Nazi, ungodly, anti-human, traitorous experiments and research? How many brothers and sisters right now, brothers and sisters who listen and hear this show, how many of our brothers and sisters are being incarcerated and being subjected to medical experiments right now? Right now. I hear their screams. The pain. Oh, y'all just not hearing the old man today. My friends, it should be our imperative to ensure liberty and prosperity for every member of the human family. The decent men and women have to unite and remove those who are the puppets of the terrorists, who are the puppets of the aliens, who are the puppets of those who want to see us subjugated and enslaved for all eternity, never posing a cosmic threat to the hierarchy that's in place now. Brothers and sisters, may today be the day we change our collective fate. Let's continue.
So the Nazi rocket program, as we know it, started at Peenemünde, was later relocated, and the person in charge of this was General Walter Dornberger, and his assistant was Werner von Braun. We'll get back to them in a second. Another important personality in aviation medicine this time was Dr. Hubertus Struckold. He's a man in charge of all sorts of horrendous experiments on living persons in the camps, and yet is considered the father of aviation medicine. He was brought to the United States. He was given his own institute at Randolph Air Force Base in Texas, and they had a building named after him until the local Daughters of the American Revolution decided that having a building named after this guy was probably not the best message to send to our next generations of young people studying medicine, so they took the name off. People were aware that Strickhold was basically a monster. We've all heard of Operation Paperclip, I think. Started as Operation Crossbow, Operation Overcast. The British were trying to get the scientists, Russians were trying to get Nazi scientists, and the Americans had their own program, which they then later renamed as Paperclip. It wasn't just the men, the scientists they were bringing over, it was also their documentation. It was also as much machinery as they could possibly get. We are talking about hundreds of railroad cars, freight cars filled with documents and equipment and machinery. Not talking even about the hundreds at first, and then thousands of Nazi scientists that were brought to the United States. Here's a photograph of the team at Fort Bliss, Texas, Paperclip members. That's a hell of a lot of Nazi scientists. And not a single funny hat among them, I will point out.
Nowadays, it's not so much the funny hats, it's the small hats. Nathan, peace and power. Welcome to the show. I hope you guys heard what he had just said. I want to see if I can actually maybe go back to that. Hold on.
Institute at Randolph Air Force Base in Texas. And they had a building named after him until the local Daughters of the American
Black Zionists. Peace and power, brother. Welcome to the show.
Revolution decided that having a building named after this guy was probably not the best message to send.
Now, how can the Daughters of the Confederate or whatever say that, having a Nazi building named after, having a building named after Nazi is a bad idea, but having a damn statue of a Confederate general is a good idea? You see how the game's being played, y'all? When it pertains to us, all things are cool. But when it pertains to others, no, this is inappropriate. We can't have a building named after a Nazi, but we can go down to General Lee's fucking form. See, the reason why I'm so upset over the Nazi issue is for a couple of reasons. One, slavery. Or not the Nazi, the Confederate issue is because of slavery. And the second, it's because of the men, women, and children in the Union Army that were in harm's way. If you guys claim to love the United States military, then you have to reject the Confederacy, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, the Nazis, all of it. Everybody that came against our military, you should reject categorically. Every last one of them. But when it comes to the Confederacy, we still allow that, the traitorous, anti-republic mindset to proliferate. Do you see the play? The Protestants is the KKK. The Catholics is the Nazis. Oops, did I say that? Let's continue.
To our next generations of young people studying medicine, so they took the name off. People were aware that Strickhold was basically a monster. We've all heard of Operation Paperclip, I think. Started as Operation Crossbow, Operation Overcast. The British were trying to get the scientists, Russians were trying to get Nazi scientists, and the Americans had their own program, which they then later renamed as Paperclip. It wasn't just the men, the scientists they were bringing over, it was also their documentation. It was also as much machinery as they could possibly get. We are talking about hundreds of railroad cars, freight cars filled with documents and equipment and machinery. Not talking even about the hundreds at first, and then thousands of Nazi scientists that were brought to the United States. Here's a photograph of the team at Fort Bliss, Texas, Paperclip members. That's a hell of a lot of Nazi scientists.
Yep.
And not a single funny hat among them, I will point out. One thing that's important to remember about the space program in the United States, until 1957, it was not a civil.
Brown, peace and power. Welcome to the show. I'm glad you made it. Today, folks, please hear me. We can continue down the yoke of these primitive savages that set forth these so-called laws and regulations and stipulations based and predicated on discrimination practices, or we can have a new day. We can have a new day of liberation. But it's entirely up to you. If you want to continue down the road that's been pre-planned for your personal destruction and degradation, then continue on. But if you want something different, unite, infiltrate, subvert, and bring to heel the power that be. Let's continue.
Billion program. For the first 10 years, or 15 years of its existence, it was a military program. There was no NASA. The National Aeronautics and Space Administration had not been created yet. So all of these people worked for the military. The rocket program was a military program. And you have to remember that's the origins of the space program, was with the Army, which later...
Bam! Right there. Brother Kevin King, I work with some of these people in the aerospace. All this is true. You think that this is all happening by happenstance? It's not, friends. I'm telling you, the people who are put together hate you. So why do you think the brightest of us that can actually contribute to their end goal, why do you think that they allow them to get paid? Because at the end of the play, they are going to get slayed just like the rest of us. Brothers and sisters, hear me. Now is the time. Now. Let's continue.
Later became the Army Air Force, which later became NASA. I mean, the space program went under NASA. These are supposed to be our Nazis, right? We were sold a bill of goods. I mean, the United States was told us, oh, these people are not really Nazis. They were Germans. They were scientists. They were helping out. They were working for us. They really weren't believers. Yeah, right. Why then, if this is so, did we bring the best and the brightest to the United States, give them whatever they wanted, all the resources that they wanted, whatever they needed, whatever they asked for,
and simultaneously deny resources, prosperity, and opportunity for melanated men and women systematically in the United States? Why would the United States allow the Nazis to come in, give them everything, but you, brothers and sisters, whose families, oh my God, whose families died brutalized on plantations, whose families died brutalized during Jim Crow, whose families died and brutalized all the way up until today, give you nothing. This is what I'm talking about. Decent men and women. It is your moral obligation to be a part of reparations for melanated men and women in the United States of America, descendants of slave. After the presentations, all the videos, all the knowledge that's out here, for one to say that men and women of the United States of America, descendants of slaves who are melanated, are not entitled to dignity, to love, to economic viability, then you are a part of this yoke. I don't care what color you are. You are a part of this yoke, a part of the Nazis, a part of the utter bastardization and annihilation of the true humanity, the true spirit of humankind. Turn back from your wicked ways. Join humanity. Let's fight the terrors together. Let's ascend together into the cosmos and take our place in the stars. And when we leave this mudball earth, we will hunt down every slaver, every oppression, no matter their creed, their species, whatever. And we will crush them and bring liberation to those who are weak and seek justice. Let's continue.
And the Soviet Union was the first country to launch a satellite into space. If they were really working for the United States and they had become born-again American patriots and card-carrying Republicans, yes, Republicans, how did it happen that we didn't get a rocket into space, we didn't get a satellite into space, that the Russians were the first? Well, what happened? Weren't they sabotaging our space program since the very beginning? These are the true believers. This is just a handful of the people you'll come across when you research this. Walter Dornberger later becomes the head of NASA, later gets a board position with Bell Aerospace in the United States, is considered a rabid Nazi by military intelligence officials who are doing background checks in Germany. They've got witness statements, they've got documents, they've got everything they need to put Dornberger in jail for the rest of his life. Those documents are buried. Werner von Braun was an SS major. There are photographs of Werner von Braun in an SS uniform. The SS was not the Rotary. It was not the Boy Scouts. You didn't just, kind of join the SS because it would further your career. No, that didn't work that way. In order to join the SS, you had to prove your racial purity, going back to the year 1750. There had to be no Untermenschen in your background.
In other words, there better not be no black blood up in you that we can trace. But even to them, I'm saying, the hardcore Nazi, rebuke your ways. Come back to humanity. You have a place in the family. You do not have to be scared of genetic annihilation. You do not have to be scared of persecution. Because the time is growing nigh where we have no longer the time to indulge in such practices. There are threats out of the Earth's biosphere. There are threats that are non-human in their origins that we all collectively face, whether you want to be a traitor, whether you want to be a victim or a goon in this play. Either we wake up and we realize we have to use all of our collective intellect, even the information that people channel from demons, the information people channels from angels, the information people channel from jinns and the dead, and the true intellects of the true geniuses all have to come together for one common cause and purpose, and that's to facilitate an environment of prosperity for all of humanity. If we don't do this, or refuse to do this, I'm telling you right now to your face, then your fate is already sealed. The ones who are traitors to us all has already sold us out to those in the universe that feeds on misery, despair, and poverty. Let's continue.
Right? No Jews, no Gypsies, no Slavs, no Democrats. Nobody like that in the background of your racial purity. You had to prove this, and you had to maintain a certain degree of involvement with the SS all the time. The SS was a pagan cult. The SS forbade mention.
And pagan's almost a nice way of saying atheist cult. Sister Janice, hold on one second. You're not going to go out like that. Not on this channel, sister. Bam. You should have a ranch. There will be no more deleting of Sister Janice's post on this channel. Let's continue.
Of Christian holidays, even in their documentation. The SS was extremely pagan, was extremely anti-Christian, anti-Jewish, anti-everything else. If you had a rank of major in the SS, you did not get that automatically. You got that because you proved yourself. And Werner von Braun was proven later to have been involved in meetings discussing slave labor requirements for the rocket systems at Peenemünde and also at Mittelbau. He was involved in these discussions. He knew about the killings of prisoners, the torture of prisoners. He was involved in all of that. It didn't matter to Werner von Braun. At the same time that he's working for us, we bring him over under Paperclip. He's now in the United States. What is he doing? He's sending classified materials out of the country to his comrades back in Germany. We know this as part of the documentation. It's part of the record now. These files have been declassified. Werner von Braun was working against the United States almost from the beginning. This is a scandal, But yet we consider him the father of the American space program. I mean, he's the one who got us to the moon, right? Kurt Debus was the first director of the Kennedy Space Center, the first director of the Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral in Florida. He was a member of the SS and the SA, the Sturmabteilung, right, the brown shirts, the stormtroopers, two other Nazi organizations. This is the man who turned in his friends and co-workers to the Gestapo if they made disloyal remarks. This was a true believer, once again. As I say, he was an SS officer. The Allies considered the SS a criminal organization for very good reason. And yet we put this guy in charge of the Kennedy Space Center. Theodor Zobel, another scientist, performed experiments on prisoners in the wind tunnel experiments. We brought him over, he worked for us. Hubertus Strugel, as I mentioned, tortured prisoners, killed people just for experiments, dumped them into freezing cold water to see how long they would survive, stuff like that. Jumpstarts the Aviation Medicine Institute at Randolph Air Force Base. George Rickey, very famous Nazi, murdered prisoners personally murdered them at the Mittelbau-Dora site, right, is given positions with American corporations in the United States. Emil Salmon worked as an engineer at Wright-Patterson, as you can see. He torched a synagogue. Heinz Gesicke, a rocket engineer. His family in the United States during the war was spying for the Nazis. He was fine, he was okay, denazified. Otto Ambros, we've all heard of Otto Ambros probably, executive at IG Farben. This is the guy involved in administering the experiment.
All right. Did you guys hear that? IG Farben, Otto Ambros, later Bayer, a lot of other pharmaceutical subcomponents to drugs and chemicals, fertilizers. This so-called lifestyle you're enjoying is based upon the information that the Nazis acquired from savagely torturing innocent men and women. So enjoy your little microwave, enjoy your little TV, enjoy your little Coca-Cola and apple pie. But all that karmic debt is piling up until you reject it, rebuke it, and fight against it consciously. Let's continue.
Experiments in Zyklon B, the gas that was used in the death camps. He gets a job with W.R. Grayson Company. Leonard Alberts gets a job with the Bechtel Corporation. All big American corporations, all very important members of the military industrial complex. His co-workers hated him, that he was just too Nazi even for them, and some of them were Nazis. Didn't hurt him at all. They moved him from position to position, but they kept him on. In May 29th, 1947, to give you an idea of how badly the Nazi paperclip scientists were sabotaging the American space program, the United States attacked Mexico with a missile. A missile, this one, the Hermes missile, based on the V-2 design, was launched by German scientists at White Sands Proving Ground in New Mexico. It went up and then it took a right. And it wound up in Juarez, Mexico, just outside of a heavy populated area. Hit the ground, blew a crater 50 meters across. We actually bombed Mexico with a missile in 1947. The Mexican government was not amused. You know, it's like, you know, we have people going across the border this way, you're sending missiles this way, what's up? Well, the Germans in charge of this had sabotaged the guidance system so that it wouldn't go where it was supposed to go. And the American engineers who were responsible for some of these experiments were complaining like mad to the Pentagon, saying that these guys are nuts. You know, they're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. They are not really on our side. Well, we're going to now move into another area. But just for a second, we think about this situation, this scenario. We had German scientists working for us, stationed at military bases in the United States, who were totally unmonitored. They could leave the base at any time. They would go walking through town. They opened up mailboxes. They were receiving mail from Europe. They were sending mail out to Europe. A lot of it went to Eastern Europe because they had colleagues who had been taken by the Soviets in order to help their German scientists, Nazi scientist colleagues in the Soviet Union and in the Eastern Bloc. They were sending American blueprints over to East Germany and to Russia. At the same time, they're working in the United States. These records have since been declassified, not all of them. I mean, God forbid we should declassify records that are 60 years old from World War II, right? You know, you're wondering right now, is there a secret space program? Well, there was a secret space program in the 1940s, for sure. There was a secret space program in the 1950s. We didn't know what was going on. As an American growing up with the threat constantly of the atomic bomb And, the Russians were going to bomb us and we were all going to die. And I had to hide my head under a desk because that would save me.
Duck and cover.
Growing up with this, we thought that Werner von Braun was a good German. He was not a Nazi. He was on our side. Only in the last few years, have we been able to find out that these guys had never been really on our side. They were true believers in their cause. The Nazi Party was not just a political party. It was not Republicans and Democrats like we have in the States. It was not people concerned about if we're going to have an ordinance for running a cable line or water or sewer. They cared nothing about that. The Nazi Party was a cult of true believers. Just because they lost the war doesn't mean they lost their true faith. So they maintained it through thick and thin. They looked down on their captors in the United States. To them, it was a toss-up. Do we go to Russia? Do we go to the United States? There was no ideological choice being made. It was strictly a pragmatic one. Where are we going to get the best deal? They were operating on their own. They were operating with their own agenda. So in 1947, we have the Cold War. First, we bombed Mexico, and we apologize for that later. Then we have the Kenneth Arnold sighting. We have the Maury Island affair. We have famously Roswell. In 1947, that same year, the CIA is created. The Department of the Air Force is created. A year later, Truman defeats Dewey. I mention this because of the relationship to other incidents that we're talking about.
And a year later, in 1948, the nation of Israel becomes a reality. The systematic destruction of men and women in Palestine becomes reality. Simultaneously, the Nazis infiltrates the United States and the nation of Israel. Because you look at the Israelis running the show, they are Ashkenazi Jews. Even their name, Ashkenazi, Nazi Jew. Come on, y'all. If this was a TV show, you guys would be saying, this is bullshit. I already see the play. But for some reason, you claim to not see it. For some reason, oh no, that's a coincidence, true. That's just a happen chance. There is no such thing as political luck. This is all by design. American Aboriginal, peace and power. Let's continue.
In 1950, the Korea War begins. Okay, so now we're in Cold War mode. Russians have poured across the border into North Korea. Okay, the brainwashing thing starts. Everybody's freaking out about the weird science that the Russians are using to brainwash American soldiers. Okay, a person very involved in this, and all the hysteria around this, in 1952, holds a seance in a farmhouse in Maine. The man is, no, not the Pope, not the funny hat guy, the other guy, Andrija Puharich. Andrija Puharich was a medical doctor, he was an inventor, he was a military man, a captain in the army, stationed at Camp Dietrich, later Fort Dietrich. This is the area of the United States, the military, that's involved with chemical and biological weapons. Puharich, however, was involved in trying to weaponize paranormal abilities. Puharich's focus in 1952, as early as 1952, is how can we use ESP, telepathy, all these things, in a military capacity? Since now we're facing a Cold War with people who use brainwashing methods, Puharich suddenly becomes a hot ticket item. He's talking about using the human brain and the powers of the brain to do all sorts of horrible things to people. He brings together 9 people in a seance. Now, it doesn't make a lot of sense when you realize who these people are.
Did I tell you like 20 minutes ago, 9 people runs this show? And here dude is talking about the 9 people at the seance in the Midwest, mind you, around Indian mounts. Because Indian mounts weren't made of stone, but the spiritual power was so strong. You guys just don't see it, do you? The United States is a whirlwind of spiritual power. Thus, as the pyramids are a focal point of intellectual, physical, spiritual power. I hope you guys are hearing it, man. This show should liberate your mind, get you to unity and victory.
One of them is Arthur Young. Some of you may have heard of Arthur Young. He wrote a lot of very well-received books, The Reflexive Universe, The Geometry of Meaning. Arthur Young was a great guy. He was the inventor of the Bell helicopter. He sold his rights and all of that. He left military engineering, military development at the end of World War II in order to pursue full-time his interest in the paranormal. He studied yoga, Eastern religions, ESP, psychokinesis, astrology, you name it, he was into it, Arthur Young. His wife, Ruth Forbes Hayne Young, she was also at the seance. So we have Arthur Young, the inventor of the Bell helicopter, the guy who created the Bell helicopter along with Larry Bell, his partner. We have his wife, the excessively nomenclatured Ruth Forbes Hayne Young. That's all her husband. So she's married first to a Forbes. John Kerry, our presidential candidate, was a Forbes. It's a very old, very famous family. She was married to George Lyman Payne. Payne was a direct descendant of one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence and related, coincidentally, to an actor called Robert Treat Payne. Long story. But anyway, Ruth Forbes, also married to a Payne, also married to Arthur Young. Not at the same time, you know, one after the other. She has a son, Michael Payne, who then gets a job at Bell Aerospace through Arthur Young's influence, because Arthur Young helped create the company. Her son needs a job. He gets him a job at Bell Aerospace in Texas. Her best friend is Mary Bancroft. Mary Bancroft was the longtime mistress of Allen Dulles. Allen Dulles, as you know, was a famous head of the CIA, the one that Jack Kennedy fired over the Bay of Pigs when he told Dulles he was going to split the CIA into a million pieces. Allen Dulles was the one who was fired by Kennedy and who later wound up on the Warren Commission investigating Kennedy's death, very conveniently. So these are two people, two of the nine. So Michael Payne's boss, right? The boss of Michael Payne, Arthur Young's son-in-law, is none other than General Walter Dornberger. And he's shown here. That's Dornberger over here, and that's Himmler over here. And they all got hats. So these are all guys. So Michael Payne has these direct connections right back to Paperclip, back to the space program. Michael Payne's wife is also named Ruth. She's Ruth Payne. Ruth Payne is a Quaker. She likes folk dancing, walks on the beach, candlelit dinners, and the Russian language. Allegedly, she's studying Russian.
Thank you, brother Aboriginal. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Listen, Sister Janice, thank you, thank you, thank you. The reason why this is so important, and I'm bringing it to you guys today, is so you understand the reason why we hate the communists so bad, because the Nazis hate the communists. The reason why in the 60s and 70s, the FBI came so hard down on the Cosa Nostra, the mob, the Italian mob, the Sicilian mob in the United States, because the Nazis hate the fucking mob. Because it wasn't for the mafia back in the World War II days, a lot of the invasion of Sicily wouldn't have went down the way it did. The invasion of Italy wouldn't have went down the way it did. After World War II, some of the men and women on the ground that actually put their bodies in danger were ruthlessly hunted and exterminated after the war. Oh, you're a mob boss. But during the war, it was cool because you helped the Allies. But basically, because the Allies were infiltrated and co-opted by the Nazis, who had all the back channels to all the secret documents. Oh, this is why we lost the battle of such and such. Oh, this is who snitched and told that we were working on this. Okay, let's deal with them. And they did. Let's continue, y'all. Let's continue. Unity for humanity.
That's Ruth Payne. That's Michael and Ruth in Irving, Texas. That's Ruth Payne again. She's sitting way over on the left. Here is a woman called Marguerite Oswald. Here is Marina Oswald. The picture was taken on November 22nd, 1960.
Brother Marty, peace and power. Welcome to the show. Let's continue.
63, the day that Kennedy was assassinated, that evening, they're photographed in Ruth Payne's living room in Irving, Texas. It was Ruth Payne who got Lee Harvey Oswald a job at the Texas School Book Depository, right on the route where he would be able to assassinate the president. That's Ruth Payne. Ruth Payne had visited Arthur Young and her mother-in-law, Ruth Forbes Payne Young, in Philadelphia in September of 1960. She had Marina Oswald, this Russian defector, the wife of Lee Harvey Oswald, and her children living with her in her house. What was she talking about to Arthur Young, I wonder? Did she ever mention the fact that, hey, I got this Russian defector living with me in Irving, Texas, Lee Oswald? Maybe you heard of him. He was a Marine. He defected to the Soviet Union, wanting to become a Russian citizen. He redefected back to the United States. He did all of this, and the guy's still only 24 years old. That's pretty good for a 24-year-old. A Marine, somebody involved in the Atsugi Air Base and radar technicians, a guy who spoke Russian fluently enough that his Russian-born wife thought he was Russian. Now, I don't know about you. I studied a lot of languages in my time. I mean, Mandarin, Spanish, French, Italian. I've done a lot of languages. I've studied Russian. Russian is a damn hard language to learn. And yet this young kid with hardly any formal education, just barely got out of high school, joins the Marines and learns to speak fluent Russian like that, so much that he can convince Marina that he's fluent, that he's a native Russian. So Marina Oswald, the niece of a KGB, an NKVD, an Army Military Intelligence officer, marries Lee Harvey Oswald, this Marine defector, very famous defector, and they decide to go back to the United States. Ruth Payne wants to learn Russian. That's her story. Oh, I'd love to learn Russian from Marina Oswald. So she gives her some room in her house because they're broke. And then Lee goes to Texas, and, well, the rest is history. So here's the 9. Here's the connection of these 9 people. I didn't mention all the people of the 9. We'll get to that, but they're mostly DuPonts, Astors, Forbes, etc. These are the wealthiest families in the United States at the time, blue blood Americans with degrees going back to the Mayflower or to the Declaration of Independence in some cases. Representatives of these families were at this bizarre seance. And during this seance in Maine, they were contacted, according to all the published documentation. I'm not making this stuff up and I'm not speculating. Puharich himself published this documentation saying that aliens, a group of 9, contacted the group of 9 who were at this seance and said,
okay, did you hear what he just said? Aliens contacted the group of 9. The group of 9 are pets of the aliens. The group of 9 are traitors to humanity. The group of 9 opens up the stranglehold on the rest of us. So keep on bowing down to your money. Keep on bowing down to your religious leaders. Keep on bowing down to the damn false doctrines. So it will separate you from liberation. It will separate you from freedom. It will separate you from prosperity and living the life that you desire. Way to go, humanity. Let's continue.
we are 9, you are 9. We're giving you the mission, to help transform life on the planet. And what was their first major contribution was, having to do with the assassination of President Kennedy. So this 9 to me is very strange. We have to ask ourselves a lot of questions. Did that somehow promote, evolution on this planet, or did that do just the opposite? So there's Arthur Young. There's his daughter-in-law, Ruth Payne, Lee Harvey Oswald to Kennedy. The connections are very tight. And another member of the 9, of course, was an Astor, as I mentioned, Ava Alice Muriel, an Astor. So all American aristocracy. September 12, 1962, Kennedy makes his famous, "We shall go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade," and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. The last time an American president talked to Americans this way. We're going to do things not because they're easy, because they're hard, because that's what we're going to do. He told Congress of the moon mission May 25th, 1961. In September 62, over a year later, he reiterates this in a very famous speech. You can catch it on YouTube. It's everywhere. Very brilliant, very passionate speech about what we're going to do. And then, of course, in November of the following year, he's assassinated. What does all this have to do with what we're talking about? Okay, in New Orleans, before the assassination, Lee Harvey Oswald gets a job with the William Riley Coffee Company. That coffee company still exists. He went down there to get a job. He worked for a short time. He quits. He tells a coworker, hey, I've just found the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, according to the quotation. He's getting a job at NASA. Well, in 1957, we didn't send up, the Russians sent up a Sputnik, and that scared the hell out of the American military establishment. It scared the hell out of the American people. They said, we have all these Nazi scientists, what are we getting for our, what bang for the buck are we getting here? So we have to do something about this. And so they put the fear of God into the Nazi scientists and said, okay, listen, guys, enough is enough. We fooled around enough. Now we have to actually do something. And so the government took control of the space program away from the military and gave it to a civilian organization, NASA. The problem with that was they moved the Nazi scientists from the military to NASA. So it was a change in name only. Suddenly you have military scientists who were Nazis, who were true believers. Now they're working for a civilian agency for NASA under the US government. We didn't really change anything. Direct military control was lost, but the Nazis were still in command. After the assassination, Harvey Oswald leaves the William Riley Coffee Company. He never does work for NASA, although we find out that he was probably working out of an office at the NASA site that was an employment agency for the CIA. This is something that's also come up recently. Anyway, he leaves William Riley. He leaves New Orleans, goes to Texas. After the assassination, his co-workers also all get jobs at NASA. At NASA. They're coffee company clerks, and they got jobs at NASA. As I mentioned, Ruth Paine had visited his wife, visited Arthur Young and his wife. Arthur Young believes, or he's been told, that he's been in contact with these 9 supernatural beings. Andrija Puharich, the guy who organizes this, the captain in the army involved in weaponizing the paranormal, he's the guy who discovers Uri Geller, the Israeli psychic who bends spoons by looking at them. He brings Uri Geller to the United States. He gets him involved with the Sanford Research Institute, run by Scientologists, as it turns out. All this other stuff is going on. Uri Geller eventually says he got tired of it. He thought that he was being run by Puharich as an intelligence asset. He really felt that Puharich was an intelligence agent running him as an agent for one of the intelligence agencies. But part of that program was that he felt from time to time he was being put in contact with extraterrestrial beings. Geller was mystified by what was going on in his brain by all of this. Now, whether you think about Uri Geller as being genuine or not, or a player or not, or whatever, Geller is pretty open and honest about his relationship with Puharich. He didn't like him, he distrusted him, and eventually he cut off relations with him. As I said, Ruth Paine finds Lee the job at the Texas School Book Depository. So then in New Orleans, after the assassination, Garrison remembers David Ferry, Jack Martin, all these guys, Guy Bannister. He conducts his own investigation. And he finds that all of these guys were bishops in a church, except for Bannister, who was like the Pope or something, of the Vatican in New Orleans. And then Guy Bannister and Fred Krisman were the guys who jump-started the UFO thing in 1947 after Kenneth Arnold. So he calls in Fred Krisman. Guy Bannister is dead. He died in 1964, again, mysteriously. So Fred Krisman then is called in. He's interrogated. Nothing much comes of that. So what was the secret space program, from my point of view, from the 1940s? We bring in Nazi scientists to the United States. In 1947, we have the famous Roswell incident. The Roswell debris, we know, is taken to Wright Air Force Base, eventually Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Wright Field at the time, which is the same place where we bring Walter Dornberger, Werner von Braun, and everybody else preliminarily. We bring them all together. All these guys are together in 1947 in one place. At the same time, we have all these UFO sightings. We have Nazi scientists in the space program. We're afraid the Russians have the bomb. As it turns out, a lot of people had the bomb in those days. We have a group of wealthy Americans, all involved in the militarization of the paranormal. And they make this contact with this extraterrestrial group called the Nine. I wrote a book called Sinister Forces. The very first volume is called The Nine. And it focuses on this strange bit of connections. We have these this family, this group of families having a seance in 1952 in Maine, talking to aliens in a spaceship hovering over the earth, they say. And then later we find tendrils leading out from that seance directly to the Kennedy assassination, among other things. But the Kennedy assassination being the most important and the most obvious one. If you follow the Kennedy assassination, you may know of a guy called George Morenshield.
Only reason why the guy says it's most important to him. All this goes back to disenfranchisement, exploitation, and debasement of the land by those in charge. Us who are melanated on the front line, we don't got to hear about JFK to understand this is a reality. But those who have some of the resources that can be amplified, our voices amplified, the resolve collectively have to come together. If not, then, brothers and sisters, I'm here to tell you what CNN, Al Jazeera, Israeli Times, or the Jerusalem Times, or New York Times will not tell you. And that is, there is a group of folks on this planet right now as I speak that has deep communion with off-worlders, alien entities. You can refer to them as demons, jinns, alien races. And their love for them supersedes their duty to us. It's super, but these are the people in power. This isn't, Joe, the little cook hot dog guy on the corner. This isn't Gary, the car salesman. This isn't Andy, the foreman on the job site. This is your politicians. This is your prime ministers. This is your representatives on the highest of levels and orders. And that thought right there is dangerous because it starts a process that they cannot control. If every human being was to truly unite and we identify those who are against us by their actions, there is no justify evil that would justify any means. If it's our time to blow up, then we blow up, but we blow up righteously. We won't do shady shit to ensure that more shady shit can continue against our own. It'd be different if it was another entity, another biological experience. But we do this shit against our own. Now, I know a lot of you guys know about the scientist Aku and what he brought forth on the earth. I'm here to tell you that is true, but it's false at the same time. What has been brought out of us was always in us. Therefore, it is of us. Therefore, it is an aspect to ensure the original continues. Going through, what's that, mitochondria and DNA, it all goes back to the mother, to the original woman. And you know who she is. We all see her in our dreams, in our quiet places. We see her beautiful brown eyes, her gorgeous aura, her loving embrace. But that has been manipulated and debased into, it's all about power and domination. If I could kill you, then you should bow down. My friends, this is where we fell. We must rebuke that. We must represent both the divine masculine and divine feminine that comes together in love to produce the future for the mortal race, which is humanity. It's the love of man and woman that produces the beautiful children that ensures our eternal existence. And once we free ourselves of this mudball we call Earth, and we can move freely throughout the cosmos, there's always space where balance is realized. We're just on a very imbalanced plane. Let's continue.
He was a Russian CIA contract agent who eventually helped in some way Lee Harvey Oswald and Marina. He was involved with them. He commits suicide before he has to give an interview about all of this. In his book, his notebook, his address book, when he was after he was found dead, was the phone number of a man who was also involved with the Nine. I mean, Lee Harvey Oswald was surrounded by so many bishops and so many members of the Nine. The poor guy had no chance. You know, I mean, he was basically surrounded by people who all felt they had some sort of mysterious mission, and Lee Harvey Oswald was the guy in the middle. Oswald himself didn't have much of a connection this way. Connection to military intelligence, probably. That fluency in Russian should tip you off right away in those days. But the rest of the connections to the Nine, to the assassinations before and since, are incredible. They're astonishing. We know the CIA was blamed for the Kennedy assassination. We've all heard the stories. What we don't really remember is that the CIA at that time not only was involved in protecting Nazi scientists as much as they could, and other Nazis around the world, Nazi war criminals, involved with the Vatican, as I think we've all heard. I'm working on a story right now that I hope I'll be able to publish by the end of the year, involving the monastery route in which the Catholic Church really deliberately helped a lot of very famous, very prominent Nazi war criminals escape, giving them Vatican passports, safe houses. Some of the story you've heard already before. But what we don't really realize, the CIA, at the time of the assassination, for instance, was heavily involved with another Nazi organization, the Gehlen organization, which was running agents for the CIA in Eastern Europe and against the Soviet Union. Again, just like in Paperclip, these Nazi scientists were not really working for us. They were taking our money, they were giving us phony reports. They were virtually useless against the Soviet Union. As it turns out, years later, as we find out, when all the chips are in, when all the information is there, we find out they've been sabotaging us as well. Alan Dulles was...
Thank you, Most High. Did you hear what he just said? F that. We're going to play that shit again. I want you guys to hear what he just said. After all the chips were in, after time has elapsed, and we have the benefit of reflection, we can see all the Nazi fucking spies and master agents didn't do a damn thing to make you safe in mid-America. It made you less safe. Oh, please hear me, humanity.
Protecting Nazi war criminals since before the war ended. We know that in transcripts of speeches and talks that he had with famous Nazi leaders going back to 1944 and 1945. And the fascinating thing about Alan Dulles, bringing all of these pieces of these disparate things together, was that he was Mary Bancroft's mistress. Okay, Mary Bancroft was the friend of Ruth in Maine, talking to aliens in a spaceship hovering over the earth, they say. And then later we find tendrils leading out from that seance directly to the Kennedy assassination, among other things. But the Kennedy assassination being the most important and the most obvious one. If you follow the Kennedy assassination, you may know of a guy called George de Mohrenschildt. He was a Russian CIA contract agent who eventually helped in some way Lee Harvey Oswald and Marina. He was involved with them. He commits suicide before he has to give an interview about all of this. In his book, his notebook, his address book, when he was after he was found dead, was the phone number of a man who was also involved with the Nine. I mean, Lee Harvey Oswald was surrounded by so many bishops and so many members of the Nine. The poor guy had no chance. You know, I mean, he was basically surrounded by people who all felt they had some sort of mysterious mission, and Lee Harvey Oswald was the guy in the middle. Oswald himself didn't have much of a connection this way. Connection to military intelligence, probably. That fluency in Russian which should tip you off right away in those days. But the rest of the connections to the 9, to the assassinations before and since, are incredible. They're astonishing. We know the CIA was blamed for the Kennedy assassination. We've all heard the stories. What we don't really remember is that the CIA at that time not only was involved in protecting Nazi scientists as much as they could, and other Nazis around the world, Nazi war criminals, involved with the Vatican, as I think we've all heard. I'm working on a story right now that I hope I'll be able to publish by the end of the year, involving the monastery route, in which the Catholic Church really deliberately helped a lot of very famous, very prominent Nazi war criminals escape, giving them Vatican passports, safe houses. Some of the story you've heard already before.
The rat line.
But what we don't really realize, the CIA, at the time of the assassination, for instance, was heavily involved with another Nazi organization, the Gehlen organization, which was running agents for the CIA in Eastern Europe and against the Soviet Union. Again, just like in Paperclip, these Nazi scientists were not really working for us. They were taking our money, they were giving us phony reports. They were virtually useless against the Soviet Union.
They were not working for us. Did you hear that? Us, U.S., United States. Hold on 1 second. Brother Shen, I'll get with you 1 second. I want to play this for the uninitiated yet again. I want you guys to hear this right here.
With another Nazi organization, the Gehlen organization, which was running agents for the CIA in Eastern Europe and against the Soviet Union. Again, just like in Paperclip, these Nazi scientists were not really working for us. They were taking our money, they were giving us phony reports. They were virtually useless against the Soviet Union. As it turns out, years later, as we find out, when all the chips are in, when all the information is there, we find out they've been sabotaging us as well. Alan Dulles.
Now, with that being said, keep on playing this damn game. After all the chips are in, they are not working for us. You said on all levels. After all the chips are in, we don't have reparations. Whoever is our leaders was not working for us. After all the chips are in, United States is not free. It's not the bastion of human individual expression. After all the chips are in, there's life outside of Earth that may hate us, that may want us to see us destroy ourselves. After all the chips are in, your life is utterly meaningless. It doesn't matter because the people to come will be so busy bowing down to the new regime, they won't have time to reflect and remember their ancestors. Yep, that's exactly what it means. Keep on playing games. Let's fucking continue.
Was protecting Nazi war criminals since before the war ended. We know that in transcripts of speeches and talks that he had with famous Nazi leaders going back to 1944 and 1945. And the fascinating thing about Alan Dulles, bringing all of these pieces of these disparate things together, was that he was Mary Bancroft's mistress. Okay, Mary Bancroft was the friend of Ruth Forbes Payne Young. During the Warren Commission interviews with witnesses, and you can read this in the Warren Commission transcripts, look for Ruth Payne. Read her, she appeared twice before the commission, talking about what she was doing in the days and weeks and months leading up to the assassination, how she knew Lee and Marina Oswald, all of these questions. Alan Dulles is part of that committee. He's sitting in. At the point where Ruth Payne starts to talk about her trip to Philadelphia to meet Arthur Young 2 months before the assassination, 3 months before the assassination, Alan Dulles cuts her off and changes the subject. He does not allow her to finish the story. Read the transcript for yourself, you'll see it. It's blatant. Alan Dulles, who's been quiet the entire time, suddenly jumps in, like a defense attorney, and then suddenly says, let's talk about this instead. As she's about to say who she met, who she was dealing with, Alan Dulles changes the subject, changes the story. Her information about Arthur Young never makes it into the record, and she hasn't talked about it since. what was going on. Alan Dulles knew Mary Bancroft. Mary Bancroft was Ruth Forbes Payne Young's best friend. There was a very deep connection there. Alan Dulles knew ahead of time, he had to, about Lee Oswald, Ruth Payne, Marina Oswald, and all of this. And he was desperate to cover up that part and make sure it never made it into the record of the Warren Commission. So we have a lot of wild stuff going on, including the fact that Ruth Payne's husband, Michael Payne, was working for Bell Aerospace.
All right. Let me break it down to you out what's going down. As long as the Nazis are about kicking black folks, non-melanated folks in the ass, everything's gravy. But whenever the Nazis are against basically so-called white folks with melanated genes, in other words, they're melanated people who can pass for quote-unquote white folks, then there's an issue. This is what is being displayed here with JFK. JFK, ooh! That's all that's about. It's about those who pass as white. Basically getting a hammer. Because after it's all said and done, the reason why DNA and all this shit was so rigorously invested in and allowed to come to fruition, when they hit your little ass with that little gun, that little device that determines what's in your DNA, it's not for any other purpose to ensure that your shit goes all the way back, that the mutation in your bloodline goes all the way back. And I really do see, and unfortunately it's sad, that they will win. They will win. But those who are victors of that, I want you to understand, the society that will be frothed from that victory is going to be one of total control. So unless you're used to bowing the fuck on down, you ain't going to have a good on time. But those of you who believe in liberation, such as me, band with me, join with me. Together, we will be the vanguard of free humanity. Whether we have to be like the Sith of the Star Wars saga and go underground, humanity will be free, will be allowed to express itself and live the life it deserves to live. Because I'm telling you, those who have had power over the centuries, over the millennia, even eons on Earth, are still running that same old ragged ass game. They bow down to the off-worlders, and we have to pay the price of it, the brunt of it. There's no need for that, brothers and sisters. There's no need for humanity, humankind, all so-called races, all so-called creeds need to be separated longer. We are one. We have always been one. Some of us have betrayed the whole. But I know there's been so much harm done amongst us, to us, by us. Even the modern, but it goes back to the ancient stuff that they will never talk about. They'll never talk about the point in time where white flesh or non-melanated flesh, pink flesh, was sold as if it were nothing. All you need to do is go to Vatican City, go 4 kilometers to the east, and you will find blocks upon blocks where my ancient Germanic brothers and sisters were sold. You see, everyone always talks shit about the Nazis. Oh, Germans. But the people that the Nazis come from was done so irreprehensibly wrong that many of you will not understand the true levels of which I speak. The amalgamation between the human, the Floridian, and the Neanderthal that created the Edomite through Yaku's guidance was meant to breed. Many of you will understand the Halo concept, Master Chief, the Spartan, armored, the defender of humanity against the Covenant, the alien forces. This was what the Germanians were supposed to be for fucking humanity. But it ended up being a Star Wars saga where the one who was supposed to bring balance to the Force ended up joining the dark side, butt raping everybody, and it turns out to be a fucking major clusterfuck. Oh, those warriors who understand know what I speak is true. Now it's up to you to make the difference. Now it's up to you, brother and sister. Are we going to succumb and go off into the night? Are we going to do something different? Embrace, dominate, covenant the light. Are the warriors who were meant to defend humanity, defend the women and children and weak, are going to rise up in unison and do that? Or are we all going to acquiesce to our pathetic so-called race and not defend the whole against the outside threat? I love humanity. I love humankind. I hope and I pray to the Most High that we can break the hexes and the curses and we can finally unite and show the fucking universe we are worthy of existence because we understand righteousness and we want to bring righteousness to the universe. We want to free ourselves from the lie. Thank you all for joining me. This will conclude TPIM SR Live for today. As always, I ask you sincerely, live your life with integrity, without hate, envy, or greed. Brothers and sisters, please, 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 let's try to be kinder to one another. Peace and power, unity and victory, dignity and respect, liberation. I'm out.